including a meeting at the New York Attorney General's office this week with a former president. Former President Donald Trump facing another legal battle in the Big Apple.
We are ready to fight. This is going to be a long fight. We understand this. We stand by FDA's approval.
The White House rallying support behind its fight to keep the abortion pill on the market. What we know right now about the moves being made at the federal and state levels to keep it on the shelves.
Acts of violence like this hurt. They tear at the fabric of who we are, at our society, at our state, at our country, and the city.
The city of Louisville, Kentucky in shock after a gunman kills 5 people and wounds 8 more in a shooting at a bank. And shouts of joy at Nashville City Council meeting. As its members vote unanimously to send an expelled lawmaker back to the State House. Scripps News Live begins right now. Former President Donald Trump due back in New York this week to sit for a deposition in a $250 million civil suit against the Trump Organization. Welcome to Scripps News Live. Great to see you on this Tuesday. I'm Veronica Dela Cruz. So Trump will reportedly sit for a deposition at New York Attorney General Letitia James's office on Thursday. It will be the second time Trump will be deposed in connection with a civil suit that alleges that the Trump Organization committed large-scale tax fraud, purposely understating the values of its properties for tax purposes, while at the very same time inflating the value of its assets in order to secure favorable loan rates. Now, there are new developments at the same time in a separate case involving Mr. Trump about 200 miles south in Washington, D.C., that his attorneys have filed an appeal into a judge's order that would compel former Vice President Mike Pence to testify before a grand jury investigating January 6th. Trump's motion, if granted by the appeals court, could block that testimony. Let's get you right out to Washington, where national political correspondent Kevin Cirilli joins us from the White House. So, Kevin, I know that you've been tracking Trump for a while. You've been covering his campaign since the 2016 election. You've seen the president take up multiple attempts here to block people from testifying before juries investigate him. So give us a little bit more of the background on this and why he's still trying to silence witnesses.
Veronica, former President Trump taking on the legal system here in Washington, D.C. by going against his former Vice President Mike Pence, and now a very clear division between Trump and Pence. Pence, remember, said that he would comply with the judge's order to testify before the grand jury in the January 6th case here in Washington. But now Trump says he doesn't want that to happen. This has reopened old political wounds that, quite frankly, never really healed following the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Remember, the grand jury wants to hear from about a handful of private meetings that Trump had with Pence in the weeks and days leading up to January 6th. Pence has said that during those conversations, he was told by Trump himself to look into overturning the results of the 2020 election. As vice president, he was also the president of the United States Senate and charged with certifying the results of the election, something that, of course, he did. But separately, Trump politically now feels that it is in his political interest to go after Pence, to try to position him as someone who is in with the legal opposition that he faces. Take a listen to what his attorney said just the other day on Meet the Press.
They have literally put in everybody to grand jury you could imagine. They don't respect any privilege that President Trump holds. And it's desperately trying to find an obstruction angle that just isn't there.
Now, as far as the polls are concerned, Trump has not faced any significant pushback for the 2024 polls. He remains the early frontrunner of the Republican race. Separately, Pence polling in single digits, but he feels that he can make a direct pitch, I'm told, to evangelicals, and that by complying with the courts, he will be able to renew a sense of trust in the political system. We'll see if it works. But either way, these two have never been further apart as it relates politically. Veronica?
It really is interesting how things happen sometimes. Kevin's really live for us at the White House. Kevin, thank you so much. Just a mile uptown now from the New York State Attorney General is the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, where DA Alvin Bragg has been slamming the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee's plans to hold a hearing on crime in New York City. Now, committee chair Jim Jordan of Ohio is saying that hearing will take place next week and that it will focus on DA Bragg's, quote, pro-crime, anti-victim policies that have led to an increase in violent crime in New York, end quote. But Bragg has dismissed the plan as a political stunt, accusing Congressman Jordan of wasting taxpayer dollars to travel to New York and adding that the city of Columbus, Ohio has a higher murder rate than New York City. In the meantime, Democrats are announcing plans to host next year's Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Late this morning, the party hailed its return to the Midwest, which it calls a, quote, critical Democratic stronghold. President Biden calling the selection a, quote, great choice, and says the city has already reaped the benefits of his massive infrastructure law, putting $144 million towards a project to rehabilitate the Port Calumet River bridges. The president, in the meantime, is on the move again. This is video of Biden boarding Air Force One at Joint Base Andrews this morning. He's now on his way to Northern Ireland, where he's scheduled to arrive in Belfast at just after 4 p.m. Eastern. While he's there, the president will be marking 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, which helped end much of the political turmoil that happened in that region. Let's get you live out to Belfast, where Scripps News correspondent Julia Chapman is. Julia, what security measures are in place ahead of the president's visit? And are there any threats that we know about right now?
There is a very heavy police presence in the centre of Belfast. A number of streets have been cordoned off. Vehicles aren't allowed to go down them in the area around the hotel where President Biden will be staying. And indeed, several hundred extra police officers have been drafted into Northern Ireland from other parts of the UK to help bolster the police presence here. It comes just 2 weeks after security services in the UK increased the terrorism threat level in Northern Ireland, anticipating some unrest around the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Easter is always a sensitive time in Northern Ireland, and indeed on Monday there was an attack on a police vehicle at a parade in Derry, also known as Londonderry. That vehicle set fire, but the situation died down reasonably quickly. And there are, of course, security concerns around this trip. It's only a 24-hour visit to Northern Ireland by the US president, but certainly one with a very high level of security. And that is one of the concerns, even 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement. Trying to maintain peace and security in this region is still a challenge, and one that Joe Biden says is a priority ahead of this visit.
And Julia, like you were just saying, this is a very, very quick trip. It's about 24 hours. What will the president be able to accomplish? What do we expect to see from his visit?
There are certainly expectations that he may be able to wield some influence over the political players here in Northern Ireland, where there still remains a deadlock over Brexit agreements, because even when the Good Friday Agreement was signed 25 years ago, creating this power-sharing arrangement between Republicans and Unionists, to this day there are still major issues. And in fact, the Northern Ireland executive has not been in place for over a year now because of Unionist concerns about Brexit and how it separates the island of Ireland from the rest of the UK. But certainly there are expectations that Joe Biden may be able to put some clout towards resolving that process, putting in the context of the Good Friday Agreement anniversary, saying, look how much has been achieved, but still pointing out that more needs to be done to maintain peace and political security here in the country. But he will also be meeting with the Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, talking about trading arrangements, investment in Northern Ireland, and then he carries on to the Republic of Ireland, where he'll be carrying out some visits to ancestral homes, meeting distant relatives and talking with political leaders there as well.
Very, very busy agenda indeed. Julia Chapman live for us in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Julia, thank you so much. So just before boarding Air Force One this morning, President Biden was asked about Friday's ruling from a federal judge in Texas, which could invalidate the FDA's approval of the abortion pill and pull it off the market.
And on the abortion pill ruling, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are it's completely out of bounds what the judge did. Thank you.
Congressional correspondent Stephanie Regan live for us on Capitol Hill right now. So, Stephanie, the president kept his criticism of this ruling short and sweet, but his administration has definitely had much more to say in this appeal filed by the Justice Department. What can you tell us?
Hey,
Hey, Veronica, good afternoon. Well, the Justice Department yesterday formally filing an appeal to that Texas judge's ruling that would take mifepristone off the market after Friday this week. And in the Department of Justice's appeal, they called the Texas judge's ruling extraordinary and unprecedented, noting that there is no precedent for a single judge overruling a decision, a medical and scientific decision made by a panel of experts at the FDA. So the Department of Justice asking an appeals court to put a stay on the lower court judge's ruling, ensuring that mifepristone would remain on the market after Friday this week, while the case continues to work its way through the legal system. Senator Tina Smith, a member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, said she supports the Biden administration's decision to go after this process through the court system. Take a listen.
This judge's decision is an outrage, and it throws into question over 20 years of safe and effective use of this drug mifepristone to terminate pregnancies early. I'm thinking about all the women who go to Planned Parenthood and clinics all over this country who are trying to figure out what this means for them and their ability to make decisions about their own lives and their own bodies. This decision must be reversed in the courts.
So the appeal that the Department of Justice filed was over almost 900 pages in total, so a lot included in what they are sending to the appeals court. But right now, we're just stuck in a bit of a wait-and-see aspect, as we're waiting to see if the appeals court would be able to take some move before that Friday deadline that we are currently facing for that abortion pill, Veronica.
And Stephanie, we were just listening there to Senator Smith. What about other members of Congress here? Have they been as vocal on this issue?
Well, of course, Democrats have been very vocal about opposing this judge's decision from Texas. There are actually 2 House Democrats who have already introduced a bill in yesterday's pro forma session trying to target this exact issue and trying to make sure that the FDA's approval of mifepristone does not get overruled by the courts. But, you know, that is one of a number of abortion-related bills that have been introduced this Congress. There's the Women's Health Protection Act that we had last Congress as well, has been introduced in both chambers again this year. But right now, with the split Congress, a lot of these bills might be able to make it through a Democratic-controlled Senate, but it's really unlikely to see any of these bills, especially all being introduced by Democrats, hard to find a path forward for them in the Republican-controlled House.
We have heard some members of Congress urging the FDA just to ignore this ruling, but can the FDA and the Biden administration just ignore the Texas judge's ruling?
Well, that calls to do that have actually come from really widely different parts of Capitol Hill. We've heard calls to ignore the ruling from, your progressives like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We've also heard it from South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace, that she was urging the FDA to just disregard the judge's ruling. And she thinks her party has been on the wrong side of this abortion issue since Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. Take a listen.
This is an issue that Republicans have been largely on the wrong side of. We have, over the last 9 months, not shown compassion towards women. So we've got some extreme views on this issue, but 90% of America is somewhere in the middle. And I think that 90% would be okay with listening to the FDA rather than a judge who used an old law that was determined unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. I think the vast majority of Americans would support that decision.
Now, the White House was directly asked yesterday, would the Biden administration consider just ignoring this rule? And White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre really pushed back, and she said that in its own right, the Biden administration, the FDA, ignoring a legal ruling from a federal judge would set a bad precedent of its own. So Jean-Pierre saying the White House is prepared for this legal fight, prepared for a long legal fight. She said she expects this case to make it to the Supreme Court, and she expressed confidence that the White House would prevail if the case makes it all that way.
All right, Stephanie Lieberman reporting live for us from the Capitol. Stephanie, thank you so much. And we have much more to come for you.